I'm Marcus Smith, and this is Constant Wonder. Join us as we quest for the awe and wonder of knowing we are part of something infinitely larger than ourselves. 35-year-old Victor Sweeney is a husband and father of 4 children. He's also a mortician.
My oldest is 12, almost 12, and my youngest is 3. And each one of them in their turn has pulled a chair over to the side of the casket where I'm working on somebody's makeup and stood on the casket with their arms on it, leaning over, like watching me work on a dead body, getting their makeup ready or their hair ready or something.
At the Sweeney home, death is woven right into the fabric of life. And so it's no real surprise that these children of Victor Sweeney and his wife, Paige, are able to look at a dead body the way most of us would approach a common cloud or rock or bird or bush. This is an attitude that Victor might like you to adopt as well. In fact, he'd even make the claim that funerals can be occasions of joy. Victor Sweeney is author of Now Departing, a small-town mortician on death, life, and the moments in between. He's not shy about the fact that living in a rural town like Warren, Minnesota, population 1,600, quickly teaches you how a tightly knit community kind of normalizes death. As I read his book, his description of funerals in Warren really struck a chord with me. Yeah, I can corroborate that from my own experience visiting my rural grandparents' ranch and the small town. And whenever I was out there had either just been or would be, or I went to a funeral. I can't say that it felt easy for anybody, but it was so familiar to everybody that they knew the moves, if that makes sense.
No, that's the thing. See, if you and I live in a metropolitan area with millions of people, the only funerals you are going to go to are the funerals of your parents, your siblings, your spouse, your grandparents. They're going to be gut-wrenching funerals. Whereas the folks in my town have been, yes, to the funerals of their parents and their grandparents, but also their grandparents' friends and the lady from the Dairy Queen, right? And the lady who runs the gas station and the guy who used to deliver your newspaper, right? So in some ways you get eased into this idea of funerals because you're not having to go to only the hard ones. You get to go to not all of them, like me, but a whole lot of them that aren't nearly as gut-wrenching. So you get eased in, which I like.
Yeah, and I think you get to practice, if you're lucky, you get to practice on people who are not your nearest and dearest.
Yes.
Before you have to go through that.
We just lost one of my favorite little old ladies in town who operated the Dairy Queen for years and years. And everybody knows Deborah at the Dairy Queen. So she's going to have a rather full funeral. Despite being widowed and not having any children, her funeral is going to be full because everybody knew her and everybody was close to her. It wasn't just, a server who comes and goes in your life that you see one time in a sea of a million people. This is Deborah, like someone you've talked to 20 times a summer at the Dairy Queen. And my 6-year-old daughter, I came home and I told her that Debbie died. And she goes, "Oh, can I go to her funeral?" So she's going to ride shotgun with me in the van to go set up at her funeral. And she's going to come to the funeral of the gal who gave her Dairy Queen. That's a gift I can give my daughter. I mean, it's already normalized because we talk about it a lot at home, but just to bring her right to where the magic happens, So yeah, there is something about the small town that I found fits nicely with what I'm doing because I'm not just the lone weirdo who's been to a lot of funerals. Everybody's been to a lot of funerals. So there's something in common there that I think is really lovely. One thing I really do try to do is when there are kids, grandchildren, right? Things like that at funerals, try to include them. I can't tell you how many times it drives me crazy. Let's say we have a visitation or something at the funeral home. Pretty laid back setting, nothing too scary. But you'll have one parent with all the grandkids and they're only in the entryway. They won't go into the chapel. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into the entryway and been like, "Hey, the kids are allowed up into the chapel, right?" And they'll be like, yeah, we know. It's just kind of scary. I'm like, can we just try it out? It's just their grandma. And usually what happens is once you give them permission, since I'm the guy in charge in the suit, usually they'll bring the kids up. And then what you see throughout the night is the kids running up and they'll run around the chapel or whatever, and they'll run up to the casket and they'll peek in and see grandma. And then they'll run off and go play with their cousins, and they might wander back in at another time and look, and then run out again. That's a much more natural way, I think, to deal with this. Keep the reality nearby, and they can touch on it when they feel comfortable.
I can't even count the times I've heard cultural commentary that we moderns are estranged from the reality of mortality. Many of us go from day to day in denial that we or anyone else we know will ever die. So even though I'm not surprised by his wise words, I heartily endorse Victor's theme, which brings me right back to the young Sweeney children. It's so remarkable to think about any kid these days growing up in a home where death is not such a fearful thing. We caught up briefly on the phone with Victor's wife, Paige, just to get a flavor of her unique perspective on kids learning about death, and she shared a few anecdotes that I think many of us can relate to when it comes to this issue.
When our oldest was about 4, we had fish, and we were not having good luck keeping them alive. And I remember Victor kind of was the master of ceremonies. They set up a bubble machine, and they buried the fish in the backyard. But actually, this past summer, my kids had caught some pollywogs at a pond nearby, and they brought them back home, and they were hoping to watch them turn into frogs, but they did not survive the home environment that my kids had set up for them, and so they were dead by the next day. And my second oldest son is actually been saying he's interested in maybe being a mortician one day, and then he kind of took over holding a funeral for the pollywogs, and he was like, I got it, I'll bury them. And then our daughter, who's the third oldest, she was like, okay, I'll choose the music, we'll play some music while we bury them. And so they have a sense of ceremony about the passing of animals.
The whole bit about a bubble machine, that was a little puzzling to me. For a wedding, 4th of July picnic maybe, but a funeral? I asked Paige if that equipment is routine for her family when bereaving the loss of a pet.
You know, I guess mainly it's for aquatic animals, but yes.
And one more here from Paige. I'm tempted to call this one a pet sort of near-death experience.
Our neighbors have kids that are pretty close to the same age as our kids, and they also have 2 dogs. My daughter is best friends with their daughter next door, and one day the dog got out and it was missing probably overnight, but so they were looking for it in the evening, and Fiona was just very pragmatically saying, well, she'll probably be dead by morning. to her friend. And the dad, she's really practical about death as a possibility, even though that is not how it turned out in that situation. And I think most dogs can survive overnight.
If at the time of someone's passing, you're a mortician wanting to help surviving friends and family keep the reality nearby, as Victor recommends, then you've got important work to do, and that work includes embalming, doing hair and makeup, dressing and arranging the body, and so on. It's an art, and you've got to be confident of your skills. Here's a great analogy from him that had never before occurred to me. Doing good work in Victor's profession actually requires that you pay close attention not just to the dead, but to the living.
My job as a funeral director is composed of 2 parts that seem contradictory in some ways. There's the forward-facing part, the part where you deal with the families. And then you have the behind-the-scenes part where you deal with the body. And even that itself is bifurcated because you have part of it that is science, that is concerned with anatomy and preservation and safety. But then you also have the artistic part that deals with how the body is posed. A lot of young morticians have talked to me over the years now, and usually what I tell them is something like, if you want to get really good at embalming, the thing you have to do is look at a lot of people's faces. You have to talk to a lot of people. You have to see people living, because then when you have the dead human face in front of you, you know what position it should take. And that does, I guess, require artistry. Like every sculptor spends so much time just looking at people before they even pick up a chisel. So why should it be any different when you're embalming?
I've already told you that Victor Sweeney is a mortician in a small town, which is 100% true. That said, it's past time for me to mention that Victor is also, hands down, the most famous mortician on the internet. His online breakthrough came when he first appeared in a video series called Tech Support from Wired magazine. Victor consistently demonstrates a knack for answering difficult and even morbid questions about death and dying, and he does it with great professional candor, mixed with a dry sense of humor and a wholesome demeanor that never sensationalizes, all of which is welcome for a topic that many view as taboo. His book is filled with highly educational, beautifully written stories about funerary practices and traditions, all of it drawn from his personal experience. He's admired for his death-positive philosophy, his ability to demystify funerals, and to help people better understand their experiences of grief. The report of my death was an exaggeration. Well, that's what Mark Twain actually said, although he's routinely misquoted. But people get things wrong all the time, sometimes even believing somebody's dead when they're not. Or would you believe alive when they're really dead? Which brings us now to a woman named Evelyn.
She had terminal cancer. And it seemed like every couple weeks we'd hear a rumor that she died. By the way, my little town, the Main Street, has all the businesses basically, and the funeral home is kind of way off. We're on the other side of the railroad tracks, on the other side of the highway, kind of by ourselves. So we're like the last person to get rumors and information, which is fine. That's really nice, honestly. So we get a rumor every couple weeks. Oh, Evelyn's died. You better get ready for Has anybody told you Evelyn died? Fredris from in town would call up. Well, when's Evelyn's funeral going to be? Like, I don't know. She's not dead. Because I'm definitely the one that's going to know. When the time comes, I'm going to know. And so these rumors are swirling and swirling and swirling. And I found out after the fact, when I called the family about including the story in the book, they were really distressed about this, insulted in some ways. And as I was thinking more about this, though, that story, while it might catch you off guard and you might be somewhat insulted that people are waiting for your mom to die, the reality is more like there were so many people that cared about her, that they were very intimately concerned about her state in life, whether she was living or deceased. And so as it happens, these rumors are swirling. She finally passes away early in the morning. So I go to pick her up and I bring her back to the funeral home, and with the family's permission, I embalm her. She has a gaping hole in her face. The cancer has eaten away a good part of her cheek. So I treat that, expecting to come back and fill it in and do what needs to be done. So I get home, I sleep for a little bit, I get my family ready and drag them off to church. And in the middle of church, I'm in the back because one of my kids is being rowdy. And I get a call from Evelyn's pastor. Victor, you left me a message this morning that Evelyn died. I just want to tell you that she's just fine. It's just a rumor that's been going around. I was like, no. Trust me, Pastor. She's definitely dead this time. And she's like, no. See, it's just a rumor. Like, you don't realize these rumors. I was like, no, believe me. And she didn't cotton on that this is a real thing. And finally I did. I stopped. I was like, hey, look, if she wasn't dead, I killed her this morning when I drained all the blood from her body. Like, if there's no one else you trust, it has to be me. and so she finally got the message. But yeah, it is interesting because these things swirl in a small town, the rumor mill, but also it speaks to something that is actually much more profound. And at her funeral then, you see all these people coming from Minneapolis. I mean, a 6-hour drive from me where like the nearest metropolitan is. People coming all the way up here for her funeral because she was a teacher in our little town. So people were actually really invested about her. So it wasn't a malicious rumor, but it was just simply the rumor of, boy, when she dies, we really have to be there, which I think is honestly a lot nicer than what the family kind of took away from it at the time. They learned it after the fact, right? When they showed up at the funeral and 50% of the students she ever taught were there.
Victor has a remarkable ability to guide people through the most emotionally challenging aspects of funeral preparations, and we really need to be grateful for people like him. I think they're very rare. Here's an example of what I mean. Because the effects of cancer had been very apparent on her cheek, Evelyn's family had asked, for a closed casket. In spite of which, Victor prepared her body to be viewable just in case the family should change their minds at the last minute. This is the kind of eventuality that Victor always wants to be prepared for.
We do like a soft launch, if you want to call it that. So maybe we'll get the family to come into the funeral home, or maybe it's just at the back of the church, like before anybody's there. We'll say, hey, if it's possible, like, why don't you just see Mom, see what you think? It might not be as bad as your imagination is making it out to be. And we'll open the casket, and sometimes they'll say, oh yes, this actually is not as bad. My imagination was worse. I can tell you a story. I had a gentleman that I knew very well, fell off a roof and died. With a brain bleed, they removed part of his skull cap to relieve the pressure. By the time we got him, like, things were not pretty. And so I spent hours and hours and hours putting him back together, and honestly got him looking really good, if I can say so myself. And the family was like, nope, closed casket, no closed casket. And his daughters, I said, hey, why don't we just try it? No one's here. Like, why don't you just see? And so they kind of stepped out with their spouses, and we opened the casket. And honestly, he looked great. Because here's the thing, your imagination of Dad falling off a roof is going to be worse than the reality. I tried my best. I talked to the daughters again. I talked to the spouses, trying to convince them otherwise. But the most heartbreaking thing was they chose to close casket, which I guess is fine.
And the outcome of this story connects with something Victor was describing before, which is how an open casket can often be a valuable thing for survivors, maybe most especially for young people who want to pay their last respects.
But to my horror, there was a teenage grandson in the back who was locked out of the room, and he was banging on the door saying, all I want to do is see my grandpa again.
Repeatedly in my conversation with Victor Sweeney, I had to pause to rethink the way that we, and with we I'm speaking very broadly here about average Americans, the way we conduct our grieving in an overly sanitized way, particularly those of us who don't live in small towns, places where collective community bereavement is likely to be a far more common thing. Now, as for Victor himself, well, he seems fully at ease with his chosen vocation. I dare say he likes it. How did this confident young funeral director come to think that this professional walk in life that most people would never ever consider would, for him, be the right fit? That's where this conversation is about to go. Victor Sweeney has written a remarkable book about all of this, and it's titled Now Departing, a small-town mortician on death, life, and the moments in between. I'm Marcus Smith, and you're listening to Constant Wonder. I've got another podcast to recommend to you from the BYU Radio family of podcasts. It's called The Appleseed. Each episode features master storytellers sharing all kinds of stories for you and your family, folk tales, fairy tales, personal and family tales. It's ideal for road trips, bedtime, or any time you're looking for something that the whole family can enjoy together. And here's a great side effect of listening to The Appleseed. It has a nearly magical ability to conjure up a whole lot of healthy storytelling right at home, and it often prompts the sharing of precious memories as well. Be sure to catch The Appleseed wherever you get your podcasts. We now return to Constant Wonder. I used to think that I had gotten a whole lot of childhood exposure to funerary scenes, viewings, caskets, corteges, cemeteries, burials. But the young Victor Sweeney, well, he got a whole lot more exposure. American kids are, well, what's the best word here? Shielded, protected, sheltered. Here's what happened to Victor.
Looking back, I can see that it all makes sense. Like, I can see that it's all laid out. There's sort of like this divine play. My older sister was born and died before I was born. And so my early memories are going to clean off her headstone and maintain her headstone. That's actually still something we do. So I grew up in the state of Michigan, 16 hours by car from where I live now. But every so often, every couple of years, my brothers and I get back there, and the first thing we do is we go back to the cemetery, we clean off my sister's grave. Like, it's just the thing that we always have done. So that, I think, was formative, but without me knowing it right away. And then more poignantly, I found my best little friend, I found him dead in his bed when I was 3. His name was Robbie. His mother did daycare, and she lived kitty corner to us. So my mom had brought me over there for daycare in the morning, like she did every morning, walked me across the street. And Miss Carol, his mom, said, "Oh, Robbie's not up yet. Why don't you go wake him up?" And so I ran upstairs to his room, and I climbed the red bunk bed, and I pulled back the Sesame Street bed sheets, and he wasn't waking up. And so then I ran downstairs, and I told his mom, and everything else played out pretty terribly, and I still dream about it sometimes. But what ended up happening is he had a seizure in the night and died. He had untreated seizures, or seizures that they were not able to quite manage at the time. So yeah, I was the one that found him. And it's only in more recent years where I realized, oh, that's the first deathbed I ever attended. I've attended hundreds and hundreds of deathbeds since, but that was the first one.
It's an unsettling story, to put things lightly. Most of the details of that day have grown cloudy for Victor, but a few salient memories persist, like the keening wail from Miss Carol, or his parents telling him that he could still talk to Robbie, which he did for quite a while. And he remembers Robbie's blanket and teddy bear that were tucked into the casket.
And then from the time until I was, between 10 and 20, I had 10 different funerals of aunts and uncles and grandparents and that sort of thing. So I ended up going to a lot of funerals as a young man.
You said earlier in our conversation that in retrospect, everything just kind of fits together. It's almost as though there was a destiny that from your earliest years, you had acquaintance with death and dying and bodies. And then you talk about your job, your occupation, using the word vocation.
Yes.
And you're very, very polite to people, where if they are not people of faith, you don't assume that they are. You don't impose your religious beliefs on other people.
I try not to.
When you talked about vocation, you did talk about this calling being something that comes from someplace that's external to the self.
Yeah.
And
do you guys practice the idea of vocation?
In my faith tradition, of course, there's the sense that we have maybe a mission that we're sent to complete as humans on Earth.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
And you have that.
Yeah. So here's the thing, right? Vocation is not something you can manufacture by yourself. I thought I was going to be a priest. I thought I was supposed to be a priest. I wanted to be a priest. In some ways, I was very upset about it when it was made clear to me that was not my vocation. Right? What higher calling could a Catholic man have than to the priesthood?
But becoming a priest wasn't in the cards for Victor. Who can ever really say why it is any of us is called to do whatever it is we eventually do? That said, it's not hard to speculate that Victor's path had something to do with Paige. That's Paige, whom you've already heard from once. Long before Paige and Victor got married, she was his high school sweetheart. And she was well aware, even back then, of his religious devotion, even his aim to become a man of the cloth. Of course, taking a priest's vows would have precluded nuptial vows.
I just always had a really strong sense that we were going to end up married. So I wasn't really questioning how things were going to turn out, but I'm glad that he was able to think through that on his own and really decide what he wanted and what he felt he was being called to.
Contributing to his decision to become a mortician was a book given to him by his godfather during his teenage years. The slim volume by one Thomas Lynch was titled The Undertaking, Life Studies from the Dismal Trade. I'm not sure if I should say reading this sealed his fate or that it was the final nail in the coffin. Well, my producer is rolling her eyes at my dad jokes, but hey, low-hanging fruit. What can I say? Let me just share a couple of lines, though, from this author, Thomas Lynch, a poet and mortician. I think you'll hear in these words part of what resonated for Victor, persuading him to change course. Here's Lynch. An undertaker is someone who stands with the living, confronted with death, and pledges to do whatever could be done about it. Undertakings are the things we do to vest the lives we lead against the cold, the meaningless, the void, the noisy blather, and the blinding dark. It is the voice we give to wonderment, to pain, to love and desire. The words we shape into song and prayer. One more short excerpt from this Thomas Lynch. He's writing here about his experience assisting a brand new widow who is bereft of her husband in the middle of the night. Lynch writes, "I go out because she still can cry and care and pray." As beautiful as those words may be, I am still scratching my head as to why a godfather would think to give that book to a teenager. Doesn't really matter why, Victor's interest was piqued. Maybe he could undertake a life of compassion modeled in those words. By age 18, he had decided to seek a volunteer job at the local mortuary. And here's what he says he was thinking at the time.
It was just something, well, I can try it out. And when I did, I realized, wow, this is a fit. And the reason it's a fit is because I chose it. But it was also, there was this point of grace where it was set up for me, and all I had to do was do what God asked me to do, which was not that was not my plan. That's not what I had thought of for myself. But then as you, I think, pursue vocation, you soon realize that this is actually easier than what I would have chosen for myself. The pastoral aspect of funeral service that I discovered as I kind of stumbled into it, I realized, I can still serve people and minister to people. It's not a priestly role, it's something else. But also, it takes into play the fact that I grew up with my great-grandparents in the house. I grew up around octo and nonagenarians. So I work with old people every day. This is what I've done my whole life. This is perfect. I get to do something that I'm good at by nature, and I enjoy, weirdly enough. And people seem to appreciate it. It checks all the boxes of art and science and working with my hands and talking to people and writing. How could I have possibly picked this myself? And the only answer I can find is that, no, it was vocation. It was set for me. All I had to do was say yes.
Yeah, in secular circles, sometimes people would just kind of use the cliche that somebody found their calling in life or they missed their calling in life. But it sounds to me like this is more than just an expression. This is more than just a figure of speech for you.
I think so. You have your calling, even if you use it in the secular realm. To have a calling presumes that someone is the caller, right? And you're the one that's listening. Maybe you have some false starts. You have young Samuel hearing God's voice, and he runs to Eli time and time again. Yes, yes. And finally, he's like, no, when God calls you, you say, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." And it's teaching yourself how to listen that I think is the real hard part. You make a lot of mistakes as you learn to listen along the way. That's kind of the beautiful thing, is that once you do finally submit to that and accept that with its sufferings, trust me, I don't think people can think of too many more jobs that are grimmer than funeral service. But once you accept it, you find that it's easy and that you're strong enough to bear it and that you have the skills inside of you that you need to do this task. There's a reason they call it an undertaking, right? Because it's something that's extremely challenging. So even now when I talk to students, they'll say what can I do to get into the business? I'm like, hey, look, go volunteer, get your foot in the door. There are a couple of components to this, but the big component is something I can never teach you. And you have to have it inside of you. And really what that is, for lack of a better word, is a calling, a vocation. You have to be called to it, and you'll have all the tools you need to accomplish it.
If the rumor mill surrounding Evelyn's purported death was typical small town, so too may be the way that another of the town's residents, a fellow named Johnny, got his final send-off. It's going to be odd for me to say this, and you're bound to think it odd as well, but this is actually a charming story. I think it's a great illustration of the way that Victor, not serving as a priest functioning at a baptism or a wedding, but as a funeral director, opens up the possibility for many survivors to experience joy and hope during their bereavement.
I want to preface this. As a Catholic, Catholics do not generally, we allow cremation, but we don't encourage it. Nor do we allow or encourage the dividing of remains. So like the keeping of ashes, human ash, bone dust in pendants or that kind of thing. But this guy was a non-believer. It was very delightful. I was hesitant to put it in the book, and it's actually the last chapter I wrote for the book. I was in a conversation with my editor, And somehow it came up, and I was like, oh yeah, one time I did this. And she goes, Victor, get off the phone right now and write that chapter. So that was the last thing I wrote for the book, was that chapter. So Johnny was this like delightful little bookish guy who just lived, a bachelor farmer, just lived on the farm. And after he died, I sat down with his family. And his sister's like, hey, I have this weird thing that Johnny used to ask me about, but is it okay if I ask you? It's kind of weird. And I'm like, yeah, hey, I live in this weird space. Ask me a weird question. And she said, he always joked about having his remains made into a firework. Is that allowed? And the thing is, in my state, the state tracks you from the time you pass away until you're buried in the ground, if you're a dead body, or until you're cremated, if you're a dead body. So once cremation happens, the state doesn't track where you go at all. So like, well, technically, yes. I don't know why you'd want to, but we could do it. And so as it turned out, I knew a guy in another state that I went to high school with, whose dad owned one of those like roadside fireworks stands. I don't know if, do they have those where you live?
Oh, sure.
That just pop up in the summer? So I called him and he gave me his dad's phone number, and I was telling him this idea, and he goes, I don't know, like, I think we could try it. He goes, I know a guy. So he hooks me up with this guy who makes homemade fireworks. And we met in a parking lot, and he pulls up his car and I pull up mine, and I hand him over this bag of white powder, which is Johnny's ashes. And he opens up the trunk of his car, and there before me are like 6 different options for huge fireworks. Like we're talking Wile E. Coyote, like rockets on sticks, like just crazy looking things. And so I picked the craziest looking one, of course. And so then between that had his ashes in it, and a bunch of off-season fireworks from the guy who owned the place, the family ended up putting on their own fireworks show out on the farm. And they had a great big meal and music and laughter and drinks. And then at the end, they had a big fireworks show with the finale piece being Johnny's just cartoonish rocket being blasted up over his field and his remains scattered on the ground that he tended.
I want to have you address the family's rationale behind even doing this in the first place.
Here's the thing about it is, like, when you ask, what are funerals for? There's obviously like the worship aspect, right? The thanksgiving to God for the body that you've been walking around in all these years. But if you don't have that, what are the other aspects? Like if you're a non-believer, what other aspects do you have? I think they boil down to memory, right? Remembrance, storytelling. Community is really important. So gathering together, laughing, crying. One of my good friends is an atheist. And when his uncle, who he's very close with, died, he goes to the funeral, and he's not a believer, but he's like, hey, he goes, it was nice to be in a big room where everyone felt the same way you do. And so I think that's part of it too, is just the community, just knowing that everyone there feels the same way, both sad, but also willing to look back and laugh maybe too. And then there's the aspect of, honestly, that this caveman part of feeding ourselves. It's no surprise that across every culture that's ever existed, funerals exist, and then there's food. Whether you fill the house with casseroles and Jell-O salad beforehand, or you have a meal afterward, there is something about feeding your body at a time that you're laying a body to rest that will never eat again, right? Embracing those things that body no longer is able to do, to laugh, to hug, to cry, to eat, those simple pleasures of life. So that's what they did. They put on a feast. They listened to music. They danced. They laughed. They cried. And then just to cap it all with kind of the absurd spectacle, they were intending on scattering his remains in his fields anyway, which they did with the majority of it. But it is kind of whimsical, I think, to do so with a firework.
So I've just been sitting here listening to you explain, very eloquently, by the way, what some of the aims of a funeral can be. And I'm afraid my next question is coming down a pretty big notch, but I just have to ask it, really. So let's say the state law does permit for this kind of thing to happen, for cremains to be blasted out across a field, big sound and light show, all the almost festivity of it all happening there. There are local regulations. I mean, where I live, you are not just permitted to go anytime you choose and shoot off fireworks. So I'm just asking here, where are the police during all of this? They're not left in the dark about what's going on, I wouldn't think.
Yeah, so we did this in the spring. At least in our county, there are ordinances, right? You can shoot them off on New Year's Eve and on the 4th of July. So in advance of this, I called the local sheriff and I was like, hey, so Johnny's family are going to be doing this thing out in the farm east of town. Like, are we going to have any problems? And the sheriff is like, I think we'll find ourselves on the west side of the county that day. That's what you get away with in a small town. They realize this is not just for show or for mischievousness. It's for remembrance and community.
So he was just willing to turn a blind eye to the whole thing?
Yeah. Nobody said a word.
The Victor Sweeney you've heard in this episode thus far sounds totally confident, ebullient, unflappable even. But despite all of his experiences with death, even he knows what it is to find yourself shell-shocked one day by an unexpected passing.
By nature, being a dead body is not the way God intended us to be. By nature, there is something wrong with that. We were not created for death. I lost my best friend to suicide in 2018. I had the terrible job of having to explain to his parents why he couldn't be seen. He hanged himself. The medical examiner said you can't see him. The funeral home said you can't see him. And his mom calls me and is like, Victor, why can't I see him? And so I had to talk to the funeral home about my dead best friend and, all the details, skin slip, bloating, all these things that, like, intellectually I'm aware of, but the fact that it's happening to my friend Alex was pretty terrible. And then to find a way to, like, softly and trustworthily tell that to his parents. Because that's where it all comes from, Marcus. Like, it all comes from trust. They might not trust the funeral director from who knows where that's handling their son, but they trust me when I get the information. It's a hard thing. We're not meant to dictate the day on which our lives end. And everybody that's left behind, it doesn't matter how long ago it was, everybody that's left behind suffers from it. But you walk away as a family member, or as in my case, a friend, very changed. So as someone who I like to think has a really good handle on death, right? I'm the person on the internet people send in questions to ask about death and funerals. So I thought I had this pretty well under control. And then Alex took his life, and I found out afterward that all of a sudden at night, I couldn't get in the car and drive. I'd have panic attacks while I was driving to death calls. So at first I thought, because it was in the winter, so I was like, oh, it's just the bad weather. But then as the spring thawed and the summer came, it didn't change anything. The phone would ring, and I'd get up at night, I'd dread the phone ringing, and then when it did, I'd have to get out in the van and would just be white-knuckling, grabbing onto the steering wheel, trying to remember to breathe, driving with the windows down to try to keep myself from getting faint. So I really struggled with that for a long time. Or when I'd have all my family in the car, I would think this thought, which is a terrifying thought for anyone, but it's, I am traveling faster than most humans have ever traveled in history. You drive down the highway at 70 miles an hour. That's faster than most of humankind has ever traveled. In a tin can, no less, with rubber wheels. So I started having panic attacks, and I realized that I couldn't just white knuckle it for the rest of my days. So I had to kind of fall on my sword a little bit. And I got on some antidepressants, anti-anxiety medication for a little while.
As things turned out, it wasn't until Victor worked for a while with a mental health professional that he was able to get out of these dark woods. Robert, the therapist, asked Victor to reflect on a few key questions.
If you drive out into the night with your fingers clenched around the steering wheel, what's going to be different? You're going to come home and you're going to do exactly what you've always done how many other times? So what's new? What's changed? And it finally clicked for me. I'm not in control, and actually nothing has changed. The only thing that's changed is the way that I look at this and the anxiety that had built up around it, but the actual fact of it all hadn't changed whatsoever. instead of worrying about control and piloting this car that's going so fast or driving off into the dark in conditions where there's snow and ice, I can't control any of those things. And yet, every single time I return home. And so at a certain point, I realized that I don't have any control and it's okay, and I never did. That's the real game changer for me. And so along the way, I just really started to give up the sense of control and stop worrying about when the phone was going to ring and stop worrying about where I was going to drive and how far and how fast. And it started to go away over time. And even just translate that onto Alex's death, that I didn't have any control over that. Right? I was the last person to speak to him before he died, but I didn't have any control over it. So why should I beat myself up about it or translate those anxieties onto anything else? I wasn't in control, and I never have been, and just learning to live with that has been a great gift in its way.
That Victor found some degree of peace after this sort of loss, and that his anxieties started to dissipate, is almost beyond belief, given that Alex's funeral was, as Victor writes, one of the hardest I'll ever have to participate in. When I spoke with him for this podcast, I already suspected how writing this particular chapter of his book must have reopened a deep well of personal pain. A phone call comes out of the blue. Victor's in his office. He hears of his friend Alex's death. I don't hold it together, Victor writes. I put the phone down. I lie on the floor so I won't faint, and I cry. After lying there sobbing a good long time, I call Paige. Throughout the book, Victor is this open and disarming, remarkably forthright, transparent. You know that he's leveling with you.
I don't think I'm ever going to quite get over the fact that he's not here. But that's life.
Yeah,
life is hard. In some ways, like I think about my own life and I try to value it a little more because I realize like, oh man, my buddy never turned 36. How lucky am I that I get to do that? But that doesn't come easy. It doesn't come naturally. One of my neighbors just lost his wife a little while ago. We were talking about this very thing, just about how crushing this can be. And he was talking, oh, maybe I should go see a doctor. I was like, hey, Roland, like you think I have it together. I deal with this every day. Like, I've done that. And it was nice. So like he's gone in and got some help. And but it's nice to, in some ways, to be able to share not only my triumphs and stability, but even my weakness with families.
It's not been a couple of years, maybe coming up on 3, since my father-in-law passed, and he died in my home. My wife and his widow were there, and he was a man who was fiercely independent. He never wanted anybody he wanted to do everything on his own. And I know that if he had been able to see what happened, he would have felt, for want of a better word, mortified that anybody had to tend to him. And I got to wash his body, and I got to close his eyes. And I say got to now. In the moment, those were hard, difficult things to do.
Gift, though.
Yeah. But the point here is that he didn't want to be an inconvenience to anybody, and you say you have an objection to that view.
I have a strong objection to that. I think about this a lot. In my book, and honestly in my daily life, I tell people, like, be inconvenient. It's fine. Impose on other people. Like, there is no better time for you to ask for help than when you're in the midst of dealing with grief or dealing with a funeral. And the thing about it is people want to help you. And so it's on you to just allow them to do it. I mean, people will naturally gravitate towards helping you at this time. Because here's the thing, and maybe it's the same way where you live. Up where I live, we have, hard-nosed, fifth-generation Scandinavian farmers living out on the prairie.
You're talking about my grandparents, really, right there.
There we go. They don't want to be inconvenient to anyone. They don't want to ask for help. They would not go to the neighbor for a cup of sugar. It's self-deprecation to a fault. And so when they die, we have someone who It's like, yeah, just throw me in the ditch. You know, often I hear that. Just put me in a bag and throw me in the ditch. And the thing is, when you are worried that much about inconvenience, you almost drift into selfishness. And so by that I mean, if you wanted me to literally throw you into the ditch, Bob, where are your family going to gather to say goodbye to you? Where are they going to gather after the earth covers you over to mourn you? Where are your great-grandchildren going to show up and read your name and remember you fondly, hopefully, right? And so with your father-in-law dying in the home, I say what a gift, because imagine if he'd have died tucked away in a nursing home with no one around him. Would you have learned the gifts of patience that you had to learn in that time when he lived with you? Like, would you have had to learn that same sort of tenderness of washing an aging, decrepit body? Maybe not. And then you have the gift of having all your family there and being surrounded by love when you die. And not only for your father-in-law to be surrounded by love, but for your wife to be surrounded by the rest of the family on the worst day. What a beautiful thing when we talk about this kind of running away from being inconvenient, which we cannot escape, by the way. From the moment we're born, we're terribly inconvenient. And the more you try to run away from that, I think the more selfish you get. And so really, like, the antidote, or maybe the concurrent virtue with learning to be inconvenient, is selflessness, which seems almost contradictory, but there it is.
One last thing, I think, something you've written. You write, I have embraced death and come to fear little to nothing of it.
Yeah. Well, what am I to be afraid of? I've seen thousands of dead bodies. I've carried hundreds of dead bodies in my arms. Like, the fact that I'm going to be one, it's like the most familiar thing in my life. Second most familiar thing, other than maybe a living body, than the one I currently have. Do I think I'm so special that I'm not going to have to deal with it? Every person who's ever appeared in a history book has already died. So why should I be afraid? I'm not special. And then if I worry about my family being left behind, like, it's the same thing. I have people say, I'm not afraid of dying, but I'm just afraid of leaving my family. Like, everyone that's ever died has left their family. And all their family carries on. And I see 100 families a year learn how to pick up and live changed lives. So why should I be afraid? My family's resilient. I have no fear of being a dead body. I go to confession every 2 weeks, and I have life insurance. So, like, on the physical end, I've taken care of things. On the spiritual end, I'm trying to take care of things. There's nothing to be afraid of. It's the thing we are set to do at the end of our days. And praise God, I don't have to pick them.
One of the most beautiful things I encountered in your book has to do with, I don't know if this is poetry or if it's literally meant by you, the idea that our bodies are kind of smaller than our souls.
Yeah, that's true, isn't it?
What do you mean?
Well, I'll leave you with this. There's a Latin term, magnanimous, to be magnanimous. And in Latin, it means magna, which is large, and animus, which is souled. So to be large-souled. And the fact is, like, our bodies are very frail. Even mine, which I like to think is fairly healthy, like, I could crash in the car on the way home and that's it. It's over. Every time I have a funeral of someone my age, I'm like, boy, that could be me. It's the mirror of the embalming room. You know, you look down and you see yourself. But if you tended your soul and you worked on building a relationship with others and you were charitable and you were kind with your time, and I would go so far as to say you weren't worried about being inconvenient, right? You gave people the gift of yourselves, whether it was convenient or not. That is how you grow your soul to be larger than your body. Because what is the thing that's going to last? Certainly not your body. Your body's not going to last. Like, yours and mine are breaking down as we speak. But if your soul lasts forever, your focus should be on that, very deeply on that. And what a great gift it would be to be magnanimous.
Victor Sweeney is author of Now Departing, a small-town mortician on death, life, and the moments in between. If you want to get a flavor of his dry sense of humor while explaining his job, he's been seen more than 35 million times on YouTube, answering questions rapid-fire about both the bizarre and the beautiful parts of being a mortician. Check out the link in our episode notes. Tenery Taylor produced this episode with help from Amelia Scott and Madeline Rollins. Sound design by Gabriel Haro. I'm Marcus Smith. I want to recommend another BYU radio podcast that I think you'll really enjoy. It's called Uncomfy, Sticking with Moments That Challenge Us. It's brand new and it has video as well as audio. If you're someone who wants to engage with others on important topics, but you're not sure just how, or maybe you're burned out on social media and you wish you could bring some humanity back into discussions in real life, maybe still online, maybe not, well then Uncomfy is for you. You're going to hear real people describing challenging moments when they decided to stick with the discomfort, and in the process, they found some community healing or learned how to talk about what matters to them or simply discovered greater empathy in their relationships with others. And you can do it too. New episodes of Uncomfy, Sticking with Moments That Challenge Us, drop every Wednesday, and you can listen or watch on the BYU Radio app or wherever you get your podcasts.